Hi, I'm Scott Mansell and welcome to Driver 61's definitive circuit to Rockingham. So today's guide is going to take a look at the International Super Sportscar Circuit, which is 1.94 miles long and probably the most commonly used race circuit at Rockingham, as there's a few different configurations. So here we are on board Radical SR3 that I raced last year, and we're going to take you for a lap looking at braking references, racing lines and everything that you need to be quick at the Rockingham circuit. So here we are on the start-finish straight. Just a few things to point out before we get into the racing lines and so forth. You can see here where the arrow is the lighting gantry. This is where you'll be shown some flags, black flags, mechanical flags for example, and the lights when the race starts. Now one thing to notice here at Rockingham is that the pit wall is a long way away. So if you're racing there or on a test day, it can be quite difficult to see your pit board. Just something to bear in mind. If you've got a radio in a car, then obviously it's no problem. So as we're coming down the pit straight here, we're heading into turn one, which actually uses the first turn of the oval at the Rockingham circuit. So the first turn is very, very quick in a lot of cars. Most cars, in fact, it's flat out. But if you're new to Rockingham, it's really something that you want to build up to, because as you can see on the right-hand side here, there's a concrete wall. So obviously, turn one is something that you really want to be sure that you can go around flat before you do it, because if you spin or have a slide or run wide, then you're going to go straight into that wall. So please be careful. And if it's wet, then in most cars, it can be very, very challenging. So with this first turn, it's very quick. And as we always say here on Driver 61, and whenever you're driving on the circuit, you need to be looking a long, long way ahead of yourself, especially when you're going really quick. In this Radical SR3, we're heading into here at 120 miles an hour. So really, the most important thing here is to be making sure that all your inputs into the car are very nice and smooth, and that you're looking a long way ahead of yourself down here towards the white line on the left-hand side of the circuit here. So as you can see, as we're coming into turn one, we've got a few things that flash by. We've got this grey marker on the right-hand side here. We've also got this patch of tarmac on the left, and this is around the point where we're turning into turn one. Now, you don't want to be looking at these points directly, but if they flash by in your peripheral vision and you use them, then that's absolutely fine. You actually want to be looking down or have your focus down towards the white line, down at the apex. So as we're coming into shot here, you can see that what we can actually see from a long way off is the end or the beginning of this double white line on the inside. So let me just erase that for a second and head back. Even as we're coming in from the turning point here, you can see that we can see the beginning of that double white line. Now, it's not where the apex is, but it's a good reference so that we can see that we're coming down towards that double white line. And you can actually see the different shades in the tarmac here. If you see just there, you can see where the rubber's been laid down and the circuit's been cleaned up. So you can generally see where the line is as you're coming into turn one. What's important here, as we're coming out of turn one, you can see that it's flat out from the throttle trace here in the Radical SR3. As we're coming out, it's important that you're looking all the way along this pit wall, all the way down to the Rockingham sign on the outside. Now that blue Rockingham sign that's a little bit ahead of us there is where we want to be looking for and where we're going to be exiting the corner. So as you can see now, we're opening up the steering wheel and I'm actually coming out to this point, this Rockingham logo on the wall on the outside. And that point you can see all the way from when you're turning in. So obviously it's a little bit difficult from this camera angle because it's not quite tall enough. But as you can see, we're coming out towards that Rockingham sign on the outside. And again, it's not exact that we're coming out specifically on that point, but it's a good reference when you're 300 meters away and coming into the corner. So next up we've got turn two, which is Dean. It's a slightly awkward double apex hairpin left-hander. So there's a massive braking zone coming into Dean. Now this Radical has a lot of grip and doesn't have so much power, so the braking point will be really light, as the car also doesn't weigh very much. But you can see some reference points here. There's a 200 board on the wall on the right. We've got the beginning of the Rockingham logo again on the right hand side, the M there that you can see, and then a bit further down the road you can see a 100-meter board on the fence. Now again, we're not looking directly at these when we're coming down into the braking zone, but we're using them in our peripheral vision, and all these references are important so that we know the position of the car. In this Radical, I think we're braking just on the 100-meter board. Yeah, you can see we're just braking from the throttle trace and the brake trace down here, that we're braking, yeah, just beyond the 100-meter board. Now, all these references that I've just mentioned are important, not because you're braking exactly on them, but because maybe you're braking 20 meters before or 10 meters afterwards, whatever it may be. It's just important to have a reference so that if one lap you go and brake and you slow the car down too early, you know the next lap where you braked on the previous lap and you can go a little bit deeper into the corner. Now, coming down into Dean, you can actually make a mistake and get away with it because we have a tight left-hander here, but you could lock up, for example, and continue straight on around the rest of the oval. So you can actually outbrake yourself coming into turn 2, and it won't cost you any damage with the car. So we're getting all the braking done in a straight line here. You can see just in the corner of the frame here that my vision's already looking across here towards the inside of the corner. If we just head back a little bit, you can see there that my head is turned across and looking towards the inside of the corner. So getting all the braking done in this Radical, Dean is second gear, and we're bringing the car in. We're not going all the way around the outside. At this point, we're somewhere in the middle of the track. You'll see the curb pop into view in a second, but it's just here towards the inside. And we're in the middle of the road. We're not all the way on the outside. We don't want to take that racing school line of coming in really late. Firstly, it isn't the quickest way around. It's actually adding meters onto the circuit. Secondly, if you're racing, then someone will just pop up the inside of you and overtake you and then slow you down on the exit. So we're in the middle of the road here, and then we're allowing the car to hook back in to make the second part of the apex. And we're going to use a little bit of this curb on the inside. You can see I've got quite a lot of steering angle in the car here, and we're allowing the car to rotate and come in. Now in this Radical it's pretty stiff, so you'll see that I won't be using too much of the curb around here at Donington. We can use a little bit of this curb on the inside, and if you're in a saloon car, track day car, then you can probably use all of it and it won't destabilize the car too much. But we're getting the car turned at this point. We're moving our vision up here towards the exit, and it's important that we're looking that extra bit in front of us so we know how we can release the steering as we're coming out of Dean and when we can get back on the throttle fully. So as you can see, I'm flat out now on the throttle, and I'm allowing the car to push all the way to the outside of the track. As you can see, this exit curb is actually quite aggressive. You only want to use probably 3/4 of it. You don't want to run onto the sausage too much, as it will disrupt the car, and obviously coming out of here you want to get the tyre on the road to get as much traction as you can coming out of the corner. So you only want to use probably 3/4 of the curbing coming out. Now next up we've got turn 3, which is a right-hander called Yentwood. It's important that we get the car back over to the left-hand side of the circuit and then parallel with the white line on the outside before we brake into Yentwood. Obviously we don't want any steering angle in the car when we're getting on the brakes for this right-hander. So I've got the car in a straight line and now we're on the brakes. Again, with the Radical we can get on the brakes pretty late. We're going to go beyond this 100-meter mark, but if you're in a track day car or a car that has more power and less grip, then you're going to be braking probably somewhere in this area. We also have the turn-in board down here, which is going to be too late for our braking reference, but use whichever one is closest to your braking point as a reference, so then you can have the highest accuracy. So coming into Yentwood, we've got the car in a straight line, parallel with the white line. You can see I'm still on the throttle here, and then we get on the brakes super late in this lightweight Radical. I'll have moved my vision already to the inside here so I can see the curb on the inside. You don't want to lock a brake here or run wide coming through Yentwood because there's just grass and then a gravel trap on the outside, so it will definitely cost you some time if you run in too deep into Yentwood. We're down a couple of gears into third gear in this Radical. We're bringing it in, and always Yentwood just feels a little bit awkward. It's a tight right hand, but it always feels really awkward when you're coming in. My vision's at the apex here, and you can take quite a lot of the inside curb, but it will disrupt the car slightly. We want to be running right up to the sausage on the inside and try not to use the sausage too much. If you're in a saloon car, a track day car, you might be able to use the sausage a little bit without it disrupting the car too much, but you don't want to take too much of that orange curb on the inside. Next, we're moving our vision up towards the exit point so we can see how we're rotating the car, see when we can begin to release the steering angle and get back on the accelerator again. So here we are at the apex, and now I've taken all of the curb there, as you can see, towards the end of the sausage curb. Then we're getting back on the throttle, we're going uphill, and it's really, really easy to be greedy and use too much of the exit here. According to the UK racing rules, we can only run up to the edge of the exit curb here. Any further in this zone, then really you should be getting a penalty. Now, they don't always do that at Rockingham, but if you do it repeatedly, then maybe they will give you a warning flag. Certainly in the rain, you don't want to be running on this green strip here because it can become very, very slippery. So we're heading up the hill. Next up, we've got a medium speed right-hander called Chapman Curve. It's generally a gentle brake or just a lift in most cars. It's actually a really good corner, quite a long entry to it. And as you can see here, we're coming up the hill, we're just coming over the crest. We've got a reference here on the left-hand side with the 100-meter board. Granted, you won't really be using that. This is one of those types of corners where you are just driving into the corner on feel. We want to have our vision up ahead, looking towards the curb on the inside as we pop over the crest here. And as you can see in the Radical, we're turning in flat out actually, because we do have that downforce and quite a lot of grip. But most cars, you'll be just gently touching the brake pedal. It's a common mistake for amateur drivers to really stamp on the brakes here and take too much speed out the car. But when you do that, we put too much load, too much weight over the front of the car, and the rear can become light. So if you do that, then there's a high chance that you'll get some oversteer on the entry here, which is not what we want. So really concentrate on the corner entry here. Try and make your deceleration, whether it be braking slightly or just the lift, as smooth as you possibly can. So we're turning in nice and gently into Chapman Curve turn 4. We can use a little bit of curb here, but we don't want to be using the sausage. Now, as you can see, there's a few sausages curbs here at Rockingham, and they're put in the exact place where we might be running on the grass if we're in a saloon car or something like that. So generally, they're at the perfect apex. So back here, you can see that all we're doing is looking for this orange curb on the inside, and that's how we spot our apex as easily as possible. So bringing the car in, I've not gone on the orange curb there. I've just made probably half of this curb here. You can use a little bit more depending on how stiff your car is. Something you need to test. If the car gets some oversteer or it starts to rotate slightly just because you're touching the curb, I'd advise just to use a little bit less of it so that we don't get the unwanted oversteer. Now at this point we're coming into Piff Paff, which is a really long left-hander, really important left-hander because you're in the corner for a long time. And what a lot of drivers want to do is to just treat this corner that we're in now, Chapman Curve, as a normal corner and run all the way to the outside of the turn. But what is actually quicker is to restrict yourself, as hard as it may be, through Chapman Curve, keep the car over to the right-hand side because we've got a long left-hander coming up and we want to be in the best position for Piff Paff, which is the left-hander. So as you can see here, I'm only allowing the car to come out maybe a quarter. You could push it a little bit more. You could probably use a third of the track and be a little bit wider than I am, but that still makes the next left even more difficult. So keep it quite tight as you're coming through Chapman Curve. Keep the car over to the the right hand side. We're moving our vision already back over to the left. We're letting the car settle, so we've got a straight steering so that all the suspension settles down before we go into the left-hander here called Piff Path. And we are in the Radical just a gentle lift. I mean, because we have the downforce, as I've mentioned, we can carry quite a lot of corner speed here. If you're in a track day car or a car that has more power and less grip than the Radical, then it will be a gentle brake. But again, the deceleration isn't too much, so we don't want to be stamping on the brake pedal. It wants to be a nice smooth brake or a nice gentle lift if you're in a slightly quicker car. So again, we're bringing it in towards the sausage, the orange sausage that you can see on the left-hand side, trying to keep up as much momentum as we can and get the car set properly, because we need to get a good exit coming out of Piff Path. As you can see here, I've made the apex exactly where this orange sausage curb is. I'm not taking too much of the curb on the left-hand side, because in this Radical, it would slightly unsettle the car if I took too much curb. So at this point, I'm feathering back on the throttle, trying to get flat out again, and we're continuing round to the left here. It's a long left-hander. There is a circuit configuration here at Rockingham where you go back to the right, and there's a little loop before you join the track again, but we're continuing round to the left on the International Super Sportscar Circuit. So we're allowing the car to push out. Now, this other part of track here that you can see is important just for a reference. It lets you know, even when we're traveling at a high speed, 90 miles an hour here in this Radical, exactly where the car's positioned. So as you're coming into Piff Path here, we've made the apex there. We shift our vision up to look around the corner here. But as we're coming through, it's important that we know how the car's positioned towards the outside of the corner, because we're working as hard as we can to keep it on the inside. So in your peripheral vision, even though you're looking towards the inside of the circuit, just note the other part of the circuit going by, and that we're almost on the outside of the track here. You can see that I'm almost on the outside, but we're still looking towards the inside of the corner here, towards that green marking on the left-hand side. So as you can see just below the map there, we're bringing it back in towards the second curbing on the left-hand side, as Piff Path is a double apex in this configuration. We're keeping the Radical flat out, and to be honest, in the Radical it's quite easy to keep it flat out. In other cars it can be a lot more difficult to keep the car flat or even close to flat as you're coming through here, and it's really a test of your vision, because it's really important that you have the minimum speed at the right point and you're looking all the way, a long way ahead, so you know exactly how much speed you can carry through this section of track and exactly when you can begin to release the steering wheel, so we end up on the outside of the corner. So again, we've got the point where the other circuit joins the International Super Sportscar Circuit. And again, it's a good reference just to know that the corner's ending. When you're all the way back around here, you can see that point, you can see the cones on the outside, and that's where we're making the exit. Well, just a little bit after it, but we're making the outside of the track just at the end of the other part of the circuit here. So it's important that you look at that all the way, a long way before, as you're in the mid part of Piff Path. So next up, we've got another really quick left-hander called Gracelands, probably my favourite corner at the whole of Rockingham. We've got a few references here for braking, fairly detailed references actually. So if you take a look at the video, you can see that on the right-hand side, we've got the beginning of the entry curb, we've got the 100-metre board, and we've got the end of the entry curb. Now, as I always say, you don't need to brake exactly on one of these points, but it's a really good reference as you're carrying or trying to carry more and more speed into Gracelands. And again, the brake into Gracelands wants to be really smooth so that we don't transfer too much load to those front tyres, so that we keep the rear of the car with as much grip as we possibly can. Again, a common amateur mistake is to stamp on the brakes here. One thing, that slows the car down too much, but secondly, it transfers too much load through the front tyres, gives the front a load of grip, makes the rear really light, and oversteer is not what you want as you're coming into Gracelands. So at this point, or long before, we should already be looking towards the inside of the curb here. There's a traditional blue and white curb on the inside of the corner at Gracelands. We're turning in very, very gently so we don't disrupt the rear of the car. You can see we don't make the curb at the beginning, but rather we're making the curb a little bit later, probably 3/4 of the way around. Now you can take a little bit of this curb depending on the stiffness of your car. In this Radical, I was only taking a tiny little bit. If I took too much, then it would begin to rotate and begin to oversteer. The other thing to note, at this point of Gracelands, there's a slight crest in the circuit. So generally, as you're probably 10 or 20 meters ahead of where we are now in the video, the front will gain a little bit more grip and the rear will become light. So you don't want to add to that the oversteer that you might get from running too much curb. So be really gentle with the car here and just be aware that we might get a little bit of rotation as we're coming out. You can see that the track's falling away, and at this point here we can generally get a little bit of oversteer. So you just need to be careful, because if you don't correct that properly, we can have a spin here and we can hit the wall on the inside, which isn't too far away. So as you can see on the right hand side, we've got the curb that we can run on, the normal curb, and then we've got the extra green section here. Again, the UK rules means that we should only be using this section, the normal curb, and we shouldn't be running onto the green. Now, maybe you make a mistake and you run wide, and that's fine. Rather than try to stay on the legal track, stay on the blue and white curb, I would just run onto the green curb, the concrete, and not worry about it too much, rather than try and fight the car and risk ending up in the inside wall just here. However, do that too many times in a race, then maybe you'll get penalised. Also, you want to stay off this green concrete in the rain, as it can become incredibly, incredibly slippery. So now we're heading down to Tarzan, which is turn 7 here at Rockingham. It's important that we get the car back over to the left-hand side, and you can see we've got a couple of references here. We've got the end of the tyre wall on the left-hand side, and we've got the 100-metre board just down here. To be honest, you'll probably be closer to the 100-metre board than you will the end of the tyres, so I would treat that as the most important braking reference. As you can see here in the Radical, I am not exactly parallel with this white line here. I'm actually heading down here towards the end of the curb. Let me just remove some of this drawing, but you can see the curb here. Now, as we're entering Tarzan, the circuit kinks right just a tiny little bit. So if we run exactly parallel with the white line in the braking zone, then we'll have to turn the car a little bit while we're still on the braking heavily for Tarzan. What we want to actually do is have our vision down here looking for the end of that entry curve. Just a little glance, because then as we're coming into Tarzan, we want to shift our attention towards the inside curb, which I'll show you in a few moments. So you can see we're actually coming away from that white line on the left-hand side here, and we're now making the outside of the track just beyond that entry curb on the left-hand side. So let me just rerun that for you. We're in the braking zone. It's important that we're keeping the car in exactly a straight line so that we get the maximum braking in a longitudinal direction as we possibly can. So we're coming away from this white line on the left-hand side. The car's in an exactly straight line, and then we're meeting the outline of the outside of the circuit a little bit past the entry curb on the left-hand side. By this point, we should have knocked most of the speed out the car, and we've shifted our attention, our vision, towards the inside curb there. If you need a little bit more information about where you should be looking on the track, please check out our vision tutorial in the Drivers University. So we've got a really deep entry here because we want to make sure that we maximize the exit here. Tarzan is probably the second most important corner here at Rockingham. Second to the final chicane, which we're just coming up to after Tarzan. So we have a reasonable length straight after Tarzan, so it's important that we get a really good exit. We're bringing the car in for a nice late apex. You can see there's a kink in the curb here, which is where we're making the apex. So bringing the car in, and at this point we should be beginning to think about getting on the throttle. I've taken quite a lot of curb here, but as you can see it's quite rough, but because we're going slow it doesn't disrupt the car too much. And most cars can take all of the curb here. At this point, we're already shifting our vision to around here so we can focus on when we can get on the accelerator, how hard we can get on the accelerator, and when we can release the steering angle. So we're allowing the car to push towards the outside of the circuit now. You can see I've got quite a lot of oversteer in the Radical, but it's corrected itself. And we're letting the car push out. Now, there's a pit lane entry here. Now, it's not the pit lane entry that we would use for racing. It's for the school, for the driving school at Rockingham. But we can actually use a little bit of that track. It's just important that we get back on the circuit before this area just up here, which is the beginning of the grass. So we want to keep the car back over to the right-hand side, and we're really focusing on getting a good exit coming out of Tarzan so that we can carry that extra speed all the way down the school straight here. Then we're bringing the car over to the right-hand side. Now, if you're racing, then you want to check your mirrors, make sure there's no one attacking you behind. If there is, you probably want to keep the car over to the left-hand side a little bit longer to see what they do, because the next chicane is a left-hander. If you're on a track day, bring the car over to the right, as I have in this video. Check your mirrors. If there's a quicker car, let them through on the left-hand side or whatever your track day organizer states. Also a good time to check the temperatures, oil temperature, water temperature, and make sure that the car's all in good condition. Keeping the car over to the right-hand side. Now, the braking for the next section, which is a left-right-left chicane, very slow, quite technical and very important, at least the final part, because it leads on to the start-finish straight, which is very long here at Rockingham. So it's important that we get a good exit onto the start-finish straight so that we can carry that speed all the way down the straight and minimise our lap time. So in terms of braking references, we've got this line as we come across the straight here. A little bit early for most cars, to be honest. We'll want to go a little bit deeper. But as you come down here, there's a few things that you can use. There's a bump just down around here. We've also got the end of the barrier here marked by the orange, so that's a good reference. Again, you don't want to be staring at these points, but you want to be using them in your peripheral vision. So again, we're braking in a straight line, and here's the bump. You can just see it here, just where this white line is. Now, the Radical, to be honest, probably as late a braking car as any that I've driven. So this is going to be really late for most people. So you'll most likely be using this orange mark at the end of the barrier here. Whether you're 20 metres before it or 5 metres after, it's just important that you have a reference for braking into this final chicane. Again, we're getting the majority of the braking done in a straight line. You can see that I've had a bit of a wobble on the brakes there. I think it locked the rear on the downshift. But we should be pointing our vision towards the curb on the inside that you can see here. Bringing the car into the curb, and all of this section, because it's a left, right, left, is a bit of a compromise, but the most important part is the final left, so that we open up the left and get a good exit onto the start-finish straight. We can use all of the curb here, but we don't want to take any of the orange sausage curb here. You can see there's rubber on there, so saloon cars do run it a little bit in racing, but you don't want to be taking half of it because it will disrupt the car way too much when you jump over it. So as you can see here, we're in third gear in the Radical, and it's all a bit of a compromise. We've moved our vision to the next sausage curb on the inside here. That's where the apex is. And through here, it's important that you play with the weight transfer of the car to allow the car to turn. So you bring it into the left, you get back on the throttle. You can see that I am flat out in the Radical here. As we're turning into the right-hander, I'll lift again so that the load goes through the front tyres and we transfer some of the grip to the front of the car. See here, I've just begun to lift to make the car turn. And we're using all of the blue and white curb, but in this Radical it's too stiff and we're not going to use any of that sausage curb. So now we're heading into the most important part of this section. It's important that we don't run out here too much, because that will make the following corner just way too tight, and it means that we get a really bad exit onto the start-finish straight. So where I am now is about perfect. We want to be running over the corner of this new piece of tarmac just here, with our vision down here, and the apex is actually behind behind this barrier here, so you can't quite see it, but you just need to be looking down here so you generally know the position of your car and that you're going to be on the right racing line. So you can see I'm going over the centre of this new tarmac here. We're then moving forwards and missing this first curb on the left here. We don't want to be taking this. If you get this curb on the left hand side here, you're just going to understeer and push wide, and you'll probably won't be able to get on the throttle as soon as you might if you come in slightly wider. And again, as we're coming through here, you can see that there's a sausage curb on the inside, on the left-hand side here. That's where the apex is, and that's what we're aiming for. So let's just run it back a little bit, because you can't quite see that when you're coming in. From this point here, you can't see the sausage curb, but you do know that it's just beyond that barrier on the left-hand side. So bringing it in, again, you can see that as I'm coming in, I'm lifting to get the grip to transfer to the front of the car. My vision's good. I'm using a bit of the curb, but none of the sausage curb. And then we're moving our vision up on the wall here. Now, it's important that you look up on the wall because, well, a bit further forwards than that, because that's where we're exiting, and that's a limiting factor to how fast you can come onto the start-finish straight here. Really, really important, critical that you get on the throttle as soon as you possibly can here, because we've got such a long straight. And here, you can see that we are coming up onto the banking of the oval. So as you come over this section, the car will actually just gain a little bit of grip because you're putting more vertical load through the tyres. So it's important that you can actually run out a little bit wider up until this point than you think, and then when you hit this point, the car will slide a little bit, but then grip more than you expect, and you're coming out towards the Rockingham sign on the right-hand side here. So if I just wind it back a second, you'll see that as we're coming through the final left-hander, we've got our vision up and we're looking for that Rockingham signage on the barrier on the right-hand side here as your exit point. So we're allowing the car to push all the way out. We should be flat out. And again, now we're on the start-finish straight once again, which is the longest straight at Rockingham. So again, it's a good point to check your temperatures, check your mirrors, and if you're behind someone in a race, it's a good place, the best place to get a tow, because you're coming all the way down here, and then we're heading into Dean, turn 2, which is a big braking zone, so it has a good opportunity for overtaking. So that's all for the definitive guide to Rockingham. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.